Story Able Lecture 6053. The Assimilated. Intro. Stephen, it sounds like you've been through an incredibly harrowing experience, and it's understandable how overwhelming it all must have felt. The story seems to revolve around an eerie and intense experience in a rundown apartment building, where you encounter strange, unsettling occurrences tied to parasites that can take over people's bodies, controlling them in disturbing ways. The story of Mr. Jefferson's building was marked by oddities from the start, from the broken buzzer to the eerie atmosphere inside the building. The strange behavior of your neighbors, including Jordan, who seemed to act detached and unnaturally, began to raise questions. The terrifying revelation comes when your manager and other residents start to display unsettling, inhuman behaviors, hinting that something sinister is at play, likely the parasites that hijack their hosts. The details, like the creature crawling out of the fridge and the horrific transformation of your manager, make it clear that you're in the midst of something unnatural and dangerous. Despite your attempts to stay calm and distance yourself, the situation escalates to a point where your survival instincts take over. Your final escape and interaction with Agent Guerrero indicate that the events were part of a larger, more organized investigation into these parasites, which have been infiltrating society under the guise of normalcy. This story builds a tense atmosphere of paranoia, with moments that blur the line between reality and something more terrifying. The parasites' gradual learning curve as they assimilate with humans creates a horrifying sense of dread, as you realize these entities are becoming more capable of passing as ordinary people. Your own narrow escape, despite being physically and mentally exhausted, highlights the relentless nature of this invasion. This chilling story mixes elements of body horror, psychological tension, and the creeping dread of an invasion from within, suggesting that this could be just the beginning of a much larger and more widespread horror. I had lost my recently job working at a local supermarket, which had led to me losing my apartment that I had been living in. It was unfortunate, but luckily I had enough money to keep me off of the streets and hopefully land me into a small apartment that was cheaper than what I had been paying for on my previous apartment. I was able to find one in a shadier part of town, but I didn't really have many choices. It was either rent out the apartment or live in my car for however long it took to buy an apartment somewhere else. I walked up to the door that seemed like it was supposed to be locked until someone buzzed me in, but as I went to the button was gone with a note saying, "Pull door, buzzer is broken. Thank you, Mr. Jefferson." The note looked like it was older, looking slightly torn at the edges with the appearance of water damage and multiple layers of tape placed on top of one another to keep it on the buzzer. As I walked into the building, the smell of mold hit my nostrils with the flickering of lights above me and dust coating the bottom layers of the dirty layers of yellow paint. There were elevators in front of me that both read, "Sorry, out of order. Please use stairs at the end of each hallway. Thank you, Mr. Jefferson." I looked around the small lobby, then down both of the hallways, each having 3 doors on each side with apartment room numbers. Where the number should have been on room 1 read office with the sign on the door that said "Please knock." I proceeded to knock on the door and heard an older gentleman say, "Come in." I went into the room and was asked, "Can I help you?" by a white man with wrinkled skin and a bald head. I got to talking to a man who revealed himself to be Mr. Jefferson, and we made a contract on me renting out an apartment for a year and the talks of renewing my lease near the end of the year. I shook Mr. Jefferson's hand, grabbed my key, and began transferring my stuff to my new apartment. I was living in this apartment building for a month and had rarely seen new people move in here. I managed to land a job at a gas station right down the road. The pay wasn't as well as my supermarket, but it kept me in my apartment. After my shift at the gas station, I walked to the apartment, and to my surprise there was a man moving into the room directly next to me. I walked up to him and said, "Hey, my name's Stephen and welcome to the building. It's not as bad as it seems as long as you clean it up a bit," and proceeded to reach out my hand for a handshake. He turned to me and grabbed my hand. "Thank you, my name's Jordan, I look forward to living here." It was weird, some of his words didn't completely sync with his lip movements. Kind of like how you watch a movie that was translated into a different language. It also looked like he had to think of his name for a second, as if he came up with it on the spot. I brushed it off as me just being tired from work. I walked back to my apartment to let him get settled in, and proceeded to fall asleep. I woke up the next morning, cooked me some breakfast, and took the trash out. As I was walking downstairs, I heard a beating and squelching coming from Jordan's room. Once I dumped the trash and was walking back to my room, I saw another resident of the apartment, known as Ms. Smith, exit from Jordan's apartment wearing her pajamas. I greeted her, not questioning what they were doing together as it was none of my business. Jordan peeked his head out and greeted me, along with inviting him into his apartment for some breakfast since he had made too much for him and Ms. Smith. "No thank you, I had just ate and am no longer hungry," I replied towards him. As I twisted the key, I heard a thump as I saw Miss Johnson hit the floor. I began to run over to check up on her and help her pick herself up. I had reached her before Jordan, which was weird, since he was closer than me. I helped Miss Smith to her feet and she thanked me, then she walked away, wobbling and going from wall to wall trying to keep her balance. Like a newborn baby trying to figure out how to walk. I had noticed as I was helping Miss Smith up, Jordan was still just standing at his door, doing absolutely nothing to help. He just stared, an empty and blank stare that held no expression or emotion behind them. "Dude, why the fuck didn't you help?" I questioned him, raising my voice slightly. It is normal for us to learn from our mistakes, to fall and pick ourselves back up. It was weird, like he wasn't having a conversation with me at all. His reply seemed more like an inspirational quote than a reply to my question. "Whatever, man," I said as I just walked back to my apartment and went inside. I was getting ready for work and thought about the whole interaction, feeling a bit bad for shouting at him. Maybe he was raised differently, or maybe the whole scene just shocked him. I decided to stop by and apologize to him before I headed out for my shift. I knocked on Jordan's door and heard the shuffling of multiple sets of feet as the door flung open. The door was swung open by Jordan, and through slight opening I saw Mr. Jefferson and his daughter Jennifer sitting at Jordan's table. "Hey man, I'm sorry about my outburst earlier with Ms. Smith. I hope that doesn't ruin our relationship as neighbors," I said to Jordan. "No worries, neighbor. Would you like to join us for some lunch?" He pronounced neighbor as he had never heard the word before, and from what I could see, Jennifer was staring with her hands outstretched in front of her eyes like she was studying how they worked. Mr. Johnson was pawing at a fork that clattered onto the floor, seemingly trying to pick it up but not able to close his hands around it. "I would, but I have my shift in like 15 minutes. Maybe some other time though," I replied as I walked away. As I was walking down, I ran into another resident, Robbie, who was sitting on the floor trying to figure out how to get back up. "Need some help there?" I asked him, outstretching my hand, not really paying attention to him. He grabbed my hand a little too hard, way harder than it has ever been grasped. "Hey man, loosen your grip a bit, you're hurting me," I exclaimed, trying to pull my hand free. The grip tightened more. "How do I let go?" he asked. He continued to make his grip tighter and tighter. Pain shot through my hand, as if it was stuck in a door that was just being pushed more and more to try to get it closed. I managed to pull my hand free from Robbie. It was well known that Robbie did drugs, but nothing that made him act out unusually. Plus, he usually stays in his room when he does it with some friends, and one's always there to babysit. It was the main reason nobody made a fuss about him doing them in the building. "Are you fucking insane? You could have broke my hand?" I shouted at Robbie. He just stared at me. My words traveled from one ear and out the other. The more I looked, I could see there was no thought behind those eyes, not a single one. He continued to close his hands into a fist, but once it was formed, he kept going more and more. I saw his fingernails dug into his palm of his hand and heard the crackling of bones from his fingers, as they were not made to take this pressure. There was a final crack from each finger as the pressure finally stopped and the fingers went limp. He used his other hand to pry each finger free, each nail being torn off of the finger and staying in the fresh puncture wounds on the palm of his hand. His hands leaked a crimson red onto the floor of the hallway. He began lapping it up like a dog that was begging for water. He turned to me and licked his blood-soaked lips and teeth. I backed up more and more till I felt the door hit against my back. I quickly turned around and bolted out down the stairs and out the door, arrived at work and put an ice pack that was stored in the store's fridge and sat down in the break room, I stared at the wall, contemplating if I should notify law enforcement. His injuries looked pretty bad, but he also didn't seem to mind them that much. Was it because of whatever he was on? If I called law enforcement, he could get in trouble for possession. Maybe I shouldn't tell them. I'm sure he'll be fine. As I was thinking, my manager walked in and said, "You good? You came in looking distressed and your hand looked a bit swollen?" I replied, "Yeah, had a bit of a run-in with a junkie on the way here that grabbed my hand a bit too hard. I should be good though." After the swelling went down, I proceeded with my shift, not quite forgetting the whole run-in with Robbie. As the shift came to an end, my manager approached me. "Are you going to be good getting home by yourself? I'm on the way and can walk with you if that'd be better." I had noticed my manager had a favoritism for me, figured he just had a bit of a crush. It made me uncomfortable when he stared at me sometimes while working, but I was so thrown off with the encounter with Robbie that I accepted his offer. He walked me up to my room and I thanked him, as he stood there awkwardly seeming like he was expecting an invite in. That's when I heard Jordan's door open and he peeked his head out. "Hey y'all, I made a bit too much to eat for dinner. Would y'all like to come in for a bite?" I was going to turn down the offer, but remembered the previous encounter and how I've turned down his previous offers. "Sure," I replied as I brushed past my manager and walked towards Jordan's apartment. "I'm not one to turn down free food," my manager said, trailing behind me. As we entered the room, my nostrils were attacked by a horrid smell that I couldn't quite place my hand on. There was also bare minimum in the room. All that saw in the kitchen area was the oven, fridge, and table that came with the apartment. He popped open the fridge and pulled out a couple of beers, and in the stove sat a lasagna that he had cooked. "Feel free to dig in, and here's something to wash it down with," he said, handing me and my manager the beers. I declined the drink as I didn't have a good experience last time I drank, but he kept insisting. "Come on, one drink won't hurt you one bit." Jordan shoved the drink into my chest as my manager popped open his drink and plopped down in a chair with a plate of lasagna. "Don't be such a buzzkill, Steven. The man invited you in for a drink and some food." My manager picked into his lasagna and that's when I saw it. Something crawled around near the fridge area. It peeked its head out for a brief second but went scurrying back behind the fridge. The best that I could describe as a crawfish, but something seemed off about how it moved and the way its little eyes peeked out from the corner. "Hey, gonna get something to eat?" Jordan asked me, pulling me out of the trance. "I'm sorry, I'm not feeling too well right now. I'll have to catch you some other time," I replied. "Okay, but at least take some food before you leave. I haven't completely unpacked yet. I think I have some tin foil in a box in my room. Just hang tight." As Jordan walked into his room, my manager said from the table, "Hey, would you grab me another beer?" I replied to my manager, "Maybe we should wait for Jordan to come back before we go rummaging through his fridge." "Come on, I'm sure your neighbor won't mind me grabbing one for the road." My manager got up and swung open the door, and inside was a pulsating glob of meat that spewed out this mixture of black and crimson liquid. The liquid slid out of the fridge and began seeping onto the floor of his kitchen. There were slight burrows in the sides of the glob that looked like they were made by small critters. I quickly bent over and threw up what little substance was in my stomach, as the smell that come out of the fridge was a mixture of rotten milk and what the store's public bathroom smelt like. "What the fuck is that?" my manager said, stepping back a little while his mouth hung agape. The thing that I had thought I saw crawling behind the fridge jump out from one of the burrows and latch itself upon my manager's face. He immediately tried to pull it off, but its little crab-looking legs were buried into my manager's cheekbones and flesh. The more he pulled, the more the holes in his skin stretched. Each wound began to seep blood as it ran down his cheeks and dripped onto the floor. "Help me, Steven, get I dash." His sentence was cut off by the critter begging to move its body into his mouth. Its body tilted upward as it began to make a tunnel in the roof of his mouth. I just stood there frozen, not too sure what to do. I watched my manager fall to his knees and blood came out of his mouth. He held his head as more and more blood seeped from the corners of his mouth. His teeth gritted together and his face showed one of pure agony and pain. "They're not usually so violent with this process," Jordan said as he stepped from his room. I turned to him and slowly stepped back towards the door. This whole process would have gone a lot more smoothly if y'all would have just kept out of my fridge. I reached at the handle and swung the door open. As I stepped out, I heard Jordan's footsteps began to get closer to the door. I slammed it shut and pushed my body against, as I heard the door handle start to jiggle, and once it didn't open, I felt Jordan's body slam against the door. My head raced as the adrenaline made it hard to think of what to do next, and Jordan was ramming the door relentlessly with no indication of giving up. I decided to book it from my room. I took my keys out of my pocket and ran to my door. I got to my room as the door ripped open, slightly off of its hinges. He turned and saw me as I slid the key into my lock and quickly opened my door. Jordan began sprinting towards me as I slipped in and slammed the door behind me. I looked around my apartment and decided to push my table against my door for extra weight. I struggled to push it, hearing a pounding noise coming from the outside. I backed away from the door, hearing the wood slowly crack in certain spots on the door. The pounding became more and more violent until Jordan's fist came crashing through the door. As it crashed through the door, it went limp on the wrist and just hung there, dripping from the knuckles and wrist down to my floor. I watched him scrape the skin off of his hand as he pulled it back through the splintered hole in the door. As he was struggling to free himself, I ran to my bedroom to grab a bat I had sitting in my closet. I heard the table's legs start to scoot across the tile on my floor and knew he was able to get in. I readied my bat in my hands, shaking as I knew what was waiting for me. Jordan made his way into my bedroom, and once he made eye contact, he lunged at me like a feral animal, and that's when I swung. The momentum of the bat, along with Jordan flying through the air, was enough to send him barreling into the door. The bat snapped in two as it was cheap, old, and had been left outside in the rain a couple of times when I was younger. Jordan slowly got up with splinters littered down the side of his face, and he tabled me to the ground. He mounted on top of me and pressed his hands into my mouth, begging to pry it open with his usable hand as his jaw unhinged and his eyes rolled back. I saw the creature peer out of his mouth with its four little emerald, glowing eyes. The creature slowly moved towards my mouth. I tried to push Jordan off, but he slammed my head down on the floor of my apartment. I reached around in a daze and managed to grab a piece of wood from the bat. I jammed it into Jordan's mouth, hoping to hit the creature that seemed to be piloting his body. As it made contact, the blood from his mouth leaked onto my face and onto my hand. I'm not sure how much of the creature I hit, but Jordan's body went limp briefly and it climbed back into the hole on the roof of his mouth. I pushed his body off of mine and sprinted out of my door and towards the exit. There was a howl that came from the open door in my room, and I saw my manager come charging out of my room and straight through and into the room directly in front of Jordan's. I sprinted towards the stairs as I saw my manager get on all fours and crawling towards me. He seemed faster crawling than he did walking on his 2 feet, like some sort of feral beast that was stuck in a human's body and was tired of playing pretend. I slammed myself into the push handle on the door, barreling into the staircase and rolling down the flight. My head hit the wall hard, making it spin. I heard the door on the bottom floor open as I saw 3 figures approaching the stairs. The 3 figures merged into one as I realized it was Jennifer. "Oh God, Jennifer, you have to get out of this building," I told her as I picked myself up. "Please help me, I don't know where to go," she replied. Her voice wounded slightly off. It was more like someone trying to replicate her voice. Sure, it was a good impersonation, but it wasn't spot on. "What are you waiting for? Aren't you going to help me?" Her mouth didn't move as she said it. She was just the dummy, and whatever was inside her was the ventriloquist. "No, you're not her, are you?" I walked towards the stairs as she began sprinting up the stairs. I picked my leg up to prepare to kick her in retaliation. My shoe connected directly with her chest, and her body went flying down the stairs. I heard a sickening snap as Jennifer's head went from sitting up to going limp. I ran down the stairs and tried to jump over her body, but her hand reached out and grabbed onto my shoe. I tripped down and looked behind to see Jennifer's head forced to the side as her neck could not longer hold the weight of her head. I began kicking at the hand she had wrapped around my ankle as my foot slipped free from my shoe. As I got up and ran into the lobby, I saw red and blue sirens out of the glass door. There were some officers outside that were starting to push barricades towards the door. "Wait, please don't leave me in here," I screamed as I sprinted towards the door. I barreled outside and heard a loud bang as an excruciating pain was sent into my leg. I collapsed upon impact and slid across the cement. 2 officers pounced on top of me and handcuffed my feet and hands while placing a metal muzzle across my face. I was picked up and placed on a collapsible gurney and strapped down. I peeked my head up enough to see Mr. Jefferson come sprinting outside. Once again I heard a loud bang and Mr. Jefferson was hit, but kept on barreling towards the officers. "Open fire," someone shouted from the crowd of officers as multiple officers shot into Mr. Jefferson's body. Mr. Jefferson's corpse collapsed onto the pavement as one officer approached the corpse and secured what little was left of the creature that resided in his head into a jar. I was loaded onto the EMS and taken to a hospital. Once the adrenaline had worn off of my body, the pain in my head began to become so intense that I began to lose consciousness. When I woke up I was in a hospital bed with an officer standing next to me. "Hey, he's awake in here," he announced into the hallway. A man came in and took a seat next to me, and as I tried to move my arm I noticed it was chained to the bed. "Whoa now, just sit tight for a minute. I bet you're wondering what the hell you just went through," he said as he started some sort of device. Log number 3 of incident number 5. March 15th, 2049. This is Agent Guerrero sitting here with Stephen Joshua Fernandez, one of the surviving victims from the Jefferson apartment incident that were not assimilated. Mr. Fernandez, you were found on Stacy Street after one of the officers shot you in the leg with a rubber bullet. Do you have any recollection of this? Agent Guerrero asked me, making direct eye contact. Yes, I remember that. May I ask what exactly is going on and who you are? Please, Mr. Fernandez, I will let you ask all the questions you want once the interview is over. Until then, please answer the questions to the best of your knowledge. Now, did you come into contact with any of the assimilated residents inside of Jefferson Apartments? Yes, I was attacked by my neighbor named Jordan after he invited me and my manager into his apartment. Something latched onto my manager's face, and after that everything just went to shit. I had to fight off Jordan in my own home. Jennifer attacked me on the staircase after trying to convince me she wasn't one of them. Mr. Jefferson himself chased me out. Mr. Fernandez, did you see any weird signs with you neighbors leading up to the incident? Well, my neighbor Robbie was acting a bit off once I went to work, but he's usually high, so I just figured he was having a bad trip. There were some other times where they were a little off, but nothing too crazy. Mr. Fernandez, did you ever make contact with one of parasites? No, Jordan almost put one into my mouth, but I managed to fight it off. This will conclude this interview with Stephen Joshua Fernandez. He spoke into the device, then directing his attention to me. Okay, since you've cooperated with me, I can tell you what details I'm allowed to. The residents in your apartment were taken over by a parasite that's being used as the host to try to blend in with others. When they start off, they don't know how to quite operate, but over time they learn how to blend in more and more. Kind of like a newborn learning to walk and talk. They turn off the host pain receptors, and it seems to enhance the human's strength and stamina. Removing the parasite doesn't bring you back either. It just makes you a corpse. This Jordan you came in contact with was actually Rudy Hernandez, who was one of the 5 that first came in contact with these parasites. He got out of his chair and walked towards the door. You tell anyone about your experiences here, and we will find you. There will be an announcement about them when we get it under control, then you can talk about it with your folks. He walked out of the room and I was forced to sit there with nothing but my thoughts. It's been about 8 months since the whole ordeal, and I'm still not too trusting of people. I've been in and out of mental facilities. A stutter of someone's words or a weird behavior is enough to set me into a panic attack. I just hope one day I can return to my normal state of mind. Extra. It seems like you're diving into a narrative that blends suspense and horror with elements of body horror, paranoia, and tension. The parasite-driven assimilation of the apartment residents builds a disturbing atmosphere where familiar faces lose their humanity in an eerie, almost supernatural way. The protagonist, Stephen, finds himself in a nightmarish situation as he becomes more entangled with the creepy occurrences surrounding his neighbors. The invasive creature controlling people, the bizarre behaviors, and the sinister transformation of seemingly ordinary individuals all contribute to a growing sense of dread. The twists, such as Jordan's strange behavior, the horrific encounter with Robbie, and the disturbing events in the apartment, create a nightmarish scenario that escalates into chaos. The unsettling part is the slow realization that the people around him are being taken over by a parasitic force, making it hard for Steven to discern who's truly human and who is just a vessel for something far more sinister. The hospital scene with Agent Guerrero brings an air of intrigue, offering a glimpse into the larger conspiracy or phenomenon at play, and hints that the situation may be far from over for Steven, especially with the promise of more questions left to be answered. Overall, this setup keeps the reader on edge with its combination of tension, mystery, and body horror, creating a dark atmosphere of suspicion and survival.